Bonjour, hello, and happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to the Aqua and Orange Show, your one-stop podcast for everything Miami Dolphins. I'm Justin Heyer here with Nick Bellato, and we've got a hell of a show for you today. It is smack dab in the middle of free agency. The legal tampering period, as they call it, opened yesterday as we're recording the show at noon, and the official start of the new league year is tomorrow. But as everyone knows, most of the signings, many of the big signings, are done before we even get to that point because agents are now allowed to agree to terms with teams for their players, and then it becomes official tomorrow on Wednesday. So the Miami Dolphins have been relatively busy. Busier than some would think, not quite as busy as other fans would want, but we'll dive into all of that. We're going to start off the show, though, as we always do, with our fun trivia question. It is my turn this week. Nick, a bit of a I'm not even give any sort of preamble because it might give it away. Your trivia question for today, Nick: who is the patron saint of Ireland?
St. Patrick's.
Yay, you got it. It was a layup this week.
Yeah,
A
that was
themed
way
trivia
easy.
question
I'm
for
like
you.
trying to embarrass you. You gotta at least give me something.
I know, but I saw it when I was looking for trivia questions, and I was like, that'd be perfect. It's a themed question. It's a
A
layup.
good question.
I knew we had a lot to dive into for the show. Figured we'd go with a nice easy layup for you there on the trivia question of the day, which means we get to dive right into free agency. So
Love it.
I'm gonna give a bit of a rundown of what the Dolphins have done so far, and then I'll throw it to you, and you'll break down what we have up to this point. So Dolphins have made 7 moves so far, if we're not counting the earlier franchise tag on Mike Gesicki, who has, by the way, signed his franchise tag. The moves thus far, they have re-signed Emmanuel Ogbah at a 4-year, $65 million deal. That's a 16.25 average. Landon Roberts at a 1-year, $3.25 million deal. And linebacker Duke Riley at a 1-year, $3 million deal. Outside signings thus far, they've brought in Chase Edmonds, running back from the Arizona Cardinals, at a 2-year, $12.6 million deal, 6.3 average. Offensive guard Connor Williams at a 2-year, $14 million deal from the Dallas Cowboys. Also from the Cowboys, wide receiver Cedric Wilson at a 3-year, $22.8 million deal. And special teamer, also a cornerback, Keon Crossan at a 3-year, $10.5 million deal. Again, all of these contracts may or may not indicate things that the team might do with its own roster, still very much in flux over the next couple of days, couple of weeks. But just in a vacuum, what do we think so far of the activity the Dolphins have had in free agency?
So I feel like it's Miami playing it safer than I kind of wanted them to play it. I was hoping at this point we'd have some kind of big splash free agent. And I know that's, bitten us often in the last decade and a half, especially under the front office that we currently have. But I don't know. I just felt like with all the cap money that they had, that they would make something splashy. And when I say splashy, like I wasn't expecting them to go out and, break the bank for like a Devonte Adams before he got tagged or something like, or a JC Jackson or anything like that. I was thinking like, hey, I would really like to see one of those top offensive linemen come to Miami, Armstead or Tomlinson, right, who signed with the Jets, which actually drove me insane when I saw that. Or like an Allen Robinson, even, which, the first and third names I mentioned are still potentially out there, right? So I thought we were going to get that, but with the moves they made, I'm actually pretty happy. You remember, I was very high on bringing back Ogbah. So I think that's great. And now that eliminates what could have been a need. That eliminates what could have been a need for the going into the draft. Connor Williams, I like a good offensive lineman. From what I understand, I didn't watch every single Cowboys game, but it has some penalty issues. So, but I think that's something that can be trained out of him, especially if we have such a good offensive line coach. So I like that a lot. I like the potential of Cedric Wilson. But I think the biggest takeaway is keeping the band together, right? Spending the money to keep that defense as intact as you can keep it, which I think is going to be really big for this unit. So I'm really happy with keeping those guys, although I still would like to see something. I think, as much as I like the potential of Wilson, Still think we need a receiver, and offensive line doesn't. I don't feel like Connor Williams is going to fix our problems. Oh, and Edmonds. I do like Edmonds. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I do like Edmonds.
I think I want to start with Connor Williams because that's been the most polarizing move the team has made so far, at least amongst Dolphins Twitter. And there are a couple things to note there. You already hit one of them on the head. Connor Williams, way too many penalties. He was benched for that reason this season with the Dallas Cowboys. 15 penalties, way too many, led the NFL. Number 2, by the way, was Austin Jackson. It seems
oh, it's an upgrade.
It seems like Connor Williams' penalty issue was kind of a one-year thing. He had never had more than 6 penalties in any other season with the Cowboys, and he started a lot of games for Dallas.
Sure.
That does not mean it's okay. It does not mean it can continue. And like you said, offensive line coach Matt Applebaum, Mike McDaniel, they're going to have to coach that out of him. That being said, one of the things that seems to be at least somewhat frustrating to me is that seems to be overshadowing really everything as everyone is evaluating Connor Williams as an acquisition. He was fifth in the entire NFL in pressures allowed, and like in a good way, 5th fewest pressures allowed of all guards in the NFL. He was 11th
worst.
the 11th ranked run blocker for Pro Football Focus in terms of offensive guards as well. So the blocking, the most important thing for a lineman, he's pretty good at it, at least if you look at the metrics. Now, a lot of Cowboys fans will tell you that some of the biggest moments he would get bulldozed over. If you watched the San Francisco game last year, San Francisco and Dallas, there were times during that game, which was obviously a huge game for the team, where he did not look great. So Connor Williams has had what I would call, it's a little bit of inconsistency. It is not a home run signing for Miami. He's not the world's best guard. That's why they got him at a 2-year, $14 million deal. But if you look at the metrics, a lot of that potential for such a young guard is there.
Yeah.
Pretty stout, way better than any of Miami's current linemen in pass protection. And if you look at the metrics, also better in run blocking. So an upgrade for Miami at guard. There's some questions as to whether he might play tackle, might play guard. He played tackle in college, played guard in the NFL. My guess is they keep him at guard because it sounds like they're still looking for tackle help, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a little bit. You touched on Cedric Wilson there as well, someone that a lot of Cowboys fans really liked because when they had injury issues on that Cowboys wide receiver core, Cedric Wilson did step up. If you look at the market for wide receivers, oh my God, Christian Kirk's deal in Jacksonville, the market for wide receivers is exploding, and Miami got Cedric Wilson, who has a lot of potential. Go watch some of his tape at a pretty reasonable deal, 3 years, $22+ million. So I like that signing. Chase Edmonds, I want to spend a little bit of time with you on this one. You said you like Chase Edmonds. What were your overall thoughts on giving him $6.3 million a year?
It's a lot. I mean, so I was going to jump in and say that for the most part, I actually like a lot of the contracts they're shelling out too, because I don't think they really overpaid for anybody except potentially Edmonds. That might be the only situation where they might have overpaid. Probably did overpay. I think he is going to be an upgrade over what the team has. I think he's better than Gaskin as much, and I like Gaskin. I've tried to defend him. I like Gaskin, but he's definitely better than Ahmed, and any other running back that is on that roster. But $6 million for a running back is a lot, especially when you do need more offensive linemen. You do not have enough offensive linemen, especially considering that some might not be there starting tomorrow. So. Yeah, I think they overpaid there. But if he can come in and kind of finally give us quality RB1 production, then we're not going to worry about the cost, mid-season.
Exactly. And I do not think Chase Edmonds is going to be a bell cow. He's never been that in his career. And I think he's a little too slight to be the 20 to 25 carry a week guy. But the contract in per year dollars, I understand, is towards the higher end of the range. I think it's 12th in the NFL right now, 11th or 12th. But Chase Edmonds, that deal, it's only the first year that's guaranteed. So if they need to move on next year, they're not going to owe him all that $6 million next year. And he's been one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL. Tops, I believe it was top 10 in rushes that turn into first down conversions or touchdowns. 4.7 yards per carry career average, 5.1 yards per carry last year is tremendous. One of the best pass catching running backs in the NFL. And what I think is most important is he fits Mike McDaniel's scheme.
Right.
Mike McDaniel's already mentioned that he's bringing that zone scheme, that zone running scheme to Miami. Chase Edmonds is that one cut and burst go kind of runner. He is fast. His acceleration is fast. Go watch a couple of his games in Arizona, and dude flies right out of the gate. This is not someone who needs like a runway, like a bulldozing running back. He's got that one cut and go. I think he's going to fit really nicely in the system, and a lot of nice trick play gadgetry you could do with him too, because of his ability to catch the football, to do all kinds of different things with the ball in his hands. So I understand the hesitancy that a lot of people have with paying running backs. It's not like they're giving him some 5-year, $60 million deal. This is a relatively reasonable deal. So it's funny. When you look at most of these deals, it's almost like there's a little bit of hesitancy with some of them, but most of them in general I like. Most of these I would grade out as like a B. Most of these contracts, but we'll get into grading the whole thing once we get to our Q&A segment.
Except
Ogba.
I really think that they got him for a good deal. Considering what pass rushers go for, and considering how important he was to this team, because you and I mean, we've talked about it so many times. If you don't keep your own, trying to replace a guy from somebody else who might not fit perfectly, it usually backfires, right? Yeah. So I think even if they spent a little bit more for a guy who did not have double-digit sacks, right? 2 years in a row didn't have double, right? Even 2 years ago,
it was nine each year.
Yeah, it was 9 each year. So not double-digit sack guy, but he does literally everything else that you want, right? And with the continued emergence of Jalen Phillips and Christian Wilkins, I think this year you're going to see potentially more. I think that is an A. The rest of it, again, I think is I see nothing wrong with anything there, except, like we said, maybe a little bit of the Edmonds stuff. Because Edmonds, you brought up those numbers. I mean, like you said, he hasn't been a featured back, so the sample size is a little bit smaller than you would expect for somebody maybe making that kind of money. But I still think it was a good decision overall, especially considering what kind of running back room you have. Now, I don't think that, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this at some point today, I don't think that Miami should then shy away from taking it back in the draft. I still think that needs to be a target. But I think if you take him, Gaskin, and another, that's a very serviceable set of weapons that you can use.
For sure. And I think a bigger running back is what they're going to want to look for. Someone who could do some either early downs or goal line, because Edmonds isn't that bruiser. But let's not also misconstrue it. And anyone who might not have been watching any Arizona games or keeping up with the fantasy football, it's not like Chase Edmonds is a scat back who gets 3 or 5 carries a game. He carried the ball 116 times last year.
Yeah.
And that's having missed some games too. So they did use him. He is certainly capable of being a early down runner too. If you need him to be, he's not just a third down guy. So it's not like Miami paid $6 million for someone who they're only going to use, once or twice a drive. This is someone who can lead drives too. The Ogba deal you were mentioning there with the sack numbers, it's also worth noting that he was tops in the NFL, right up there. I believe was top 5 in pressures over the last couple of years. And you and I have talked about many times the misconception people have between sack numbers and overall production. It's not always a direct correlation. It's often not a direct correlation.
Good against the run too. Good situational awareness. I think for me, the biggest thing with Ogba is that he knows when he's not going to get to the quarterback, so he throws his hands in the air. And I know that's something I would be interested to see how many batted balls he has. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but that's an important statistic, right? That if your defensive line is impacting a pass while it's in the air, that's a good thing to have. So
for sure,
he's got a good head for the game, and I'm glad. I'm really, really glad that they brought him back. Really glad.
And I want to get into, now that we've hit a little bit on every deal, our overall perception of what we've done so far, just like from a much larger scope, bird's eye view scale. But we're going to save that for a sec, because that we'll get to our first Q&A question is going to ask us about that. So we'll get to that in just a second. In the meantime, let's do a little bit of where we are now. So the Dolphins came into this free agency with one of the top teams in cap space. They're now, per overthecap.com, at $26 million. I don't believe Over the Cap has yet factored in with that number Landon Roberts, Duke Riley, or Keon Cross, and the special teamer, which would account for about $9 million, depending on how those deals are structured for this year. So the number is probably a little bit under 20. But a lot of room a lot of room to make more room if the Dolphins want to clear up some cap space, which I imagine they do, given the fact that NFL Network's Ken Wolf is reporting the team is still looking for offensive line help, particularly in the tackle market, potentially with Teron Armstead, potentially with trading for Lyle Collins. So a lot of room. Let's run down the list. We're going to play a little bit of a game. I'm going to list out the players that are potential cap casualties that could clear up significant space without making a huge dead money dent. And you're going to tell me stay or go. Should the
That's
team...
it. Stay or go. No color to it.
Just you can give go? Color. This is our show. We can make our own rules as we go, Nick. You can give some color commentary. So let's run through these cap casualties. Again, the stipulation here was not a huge dead money hit if we cut them, but the Dolphins can still save significant money if they do let these guys go. So we're going to start with the one that I think is going to be the most controversial. Safety Eric Rowe. The Dolphins could take on just $500,000 in dead money while clearing up $4.5 million in cap savings if they let Eric Rowe go.
So it's a good thing you said yes. I can add stuff to it because I think if you can get him to restructure, maybe stretch out the deal a little bit, restructure so it's a much lower cap hit, you keep him. If he says no, it's gone.
Interesting. So I think I tend to agree. If he says no, though, I like the idea of restructure. I'm actually going to lean towards keeping him because the secondary is the strength of this team. Now, the problem that you see here is that Javon Holland is going to be starting and playing every snap. Brandon Jones is probably going to be playing nearly every snap. Nick Needham was just brought on the second round tender. He's staying for sure as the starting nickel
corner. Which is incredible, by the way. Undrafted to get a second round tender. Good for you, Needham. Good for you.
Unbelievable. He's been one of the best nickel corners in the NFL over the last year or so. So maybe I'm changing my answer now because that $4.5 million. If that $4.5 million is the difference between bringing in another lineman and not, then yeah, you might have let him go. It's just so frustrating when you have a vet in who is a starting quality guy and is not a huge cap hit. $4.5 million is not a huge cap hit.
Not at all.
So it's a tough one. Of all of the guys that I think this will probably be the toughest one because Eric Rowe has been a really solid player for the Dolphins over the past couple of years. It's just that they now have younger guys who are ready to take that spot. So that'll be a really interesting one to track. I do like the restructure there though. I'm gonna steal your answer on that. So let's go to the one that I think is probably going to be your easiest answer. Offensive tackle Jesse Davis.
Bye.
Dead money hit.
Bye, Jesse.
And 3.7.
Actually, no. Thank you for playing. You just made it much harder for everyone else to play. You know what's so bothersome for me about Jesse Davis? I remember. I think it might have been when we first started doing this show. Yeah. We were talking about him, and we were saying, you know what? There's potential there. There's potential there. It's just we didn't interpret. We were reading the tea leaves, and we interpreted that as positive potential, but it was actually game-ruining potential that we misread. And I'm over it. If he is not cut tomorrow, then Chris Greer should be fired. There it is.
That is a bold take.
Do you disagree with me?
I don't think Jesse Davis has a place on this roster anymore.
Say it. He should be fired. Say it.
I'm not going to go that far, but I will.
He's worse than backups.
I don't think he should be. I don't think he has a place on this roster anymore. He was one of the worst linemen in the NFL. The fact that they could save money by cutting him and bring in another lineman who will probably be a similar price, or use that money to go get a star. To me, this is the easiest one on the list. I don't see how this is even a question in their mind. Really, I'm not really sure what the holdup is. My guess is they're going to make most, if not all, of their cap casualty cuts tomorrow, right before the start of the new league year. Is probably the only reason they haven't done it yet, because they haven't really made any cuts so far up till this point. So I am all with you there. Jesse Davis is a go for
I will
me.
be very upset if he is still on this team.
I'm going to
be very upset because it just shows that really you're not paying attention.
I wouldn't really know why.
Yeah, it makes no sense. So okay, yeah, we're in the same boat. Chris Greer should be fired.
Other side of the line, defensive tackle Adam Butler, zero money, dead hit, $4.1 million in potential cap savings.
I would probably see him go because I think that money could be used somewhere else. I don't think Butler made that big of a difference, really. That's money that you might be able to use for maybe not even this year, but Christian Wilkins is going to be up for a new contract too, and that might be some money that you want to throw his way. So um, I know that's like taken from
Still,
one
it
to pay
carries
the
over
other.
if you don't use it.
Yeah. So but for me, I think you can. I don't think Adam Butler did anything to really keep him.
Good rotational piece, but the fact that they have Wilkins and Davis and Sealer, I'm leaning go as well. Again, that 4.1 million I think could be used. All my mind keeps going to if they can get Teron Armstead, if they can get Lyle Collins, if they can get another big name guy on the offensive line. That's where we're looking. Bradley Bozeman is still out there, one of the top centers on the market, and the team right now, like I know I said about 17 million in cap space, but let's not forget the Dolphins need to keep some of that space for the draft. They need to keep some of that space for in-season signings. It's not like they can bring themselves down to zero once the new league year starts. So Trent Brown still out there, Eric Fisher still out there, Morgan Moses still out there. There are quite a few guys that they could bring in on the offensive line. So in my mind, it's okay. Let's save as much possible because that is clearly the biggest need on the team at the moment. Defensive tackle, not so much. So I am right aligned with you there. Wide receiver Allen Hurns, $400,000 dead cap hit, 2.6-ish million cap space if he's out.
That's another one that I think he can go. And I think that's another one that's connected to literally what you just said. You need money somewhere for something, and that I feel like that's going to be better used for that contingency emergency situation than to keep it with him. I think it's a mistake to let him stay on the roster.
It's also a factor of, well, you have Waddle and Parker, and you just signed Cedric Wilson, and you brought Preston Williams back. Actually, we missed that was one of he re-signed as well. Preston
just
Williams.
recently.
And Lynn Bowden is still on this roster as well. You're potentially going to be drafting one or two guys, potentially going to be bringing in a couple of undrafted free agents at the position. The Dolphins love to mine the wide receiver spot for undrafted free agents. And there are a bunch of guys who they brought in on futures contracts. You look at River Craycraft and a couple of others. There was from the CFL, Devontae Dedman, who they brought in. It's not like there's no one else to fill that spot, and they're all way cheaper. So in terms of the wide receiver 6 spot or wide receiver 5 spot, I'm sorry, Allen Hurns, I think I'm going to have to agree with you there. Take that 2.575 and put it somewhere else. Here's one that I probably would have leaned keep, but may have changed due to recent signings. Safety and special teamer Clayton Fajedalum. He's been on the team for a little while now. No one knows how to pronounce that name. Clayton F. Zero money, dead cap hit, 2.775 in cap savings if he's out. Nope. And next, that my thinking is Keon Crossan is the next Clayton. So
right, exactly. I feel like you just got him, so you don't need another one. You don't need to. That's a lot of. I think it's a lot of kind of big money locked up in special teams to have two guys at that kind of a cap hit. Personally,
tight end, fullback, special teamer Sethan Carter, zero money, dead cap hit, 2.5 in cap savings.
Another one. I think the ones that there's no hit. I think those guys should go.
That includes Greg Little too, who we're about to get to.
Right, which is not again. Yeah. I feel like he didn't. If he wasn't good enough to start over the guys that were terrible, you should no.
Last one, tight end Adam Shaheen. Dolphins currently have Mike Gesicki, Hunter Long, Sethan Carter, who you just let go at the position. Shaheen is a $1.8 million cap savings.
I'm keeping Shaheen. I think he's a good blocker. Okay. I'm keeping him. I think he's a good blocker. Because we haven't re-signed Durham Smythe yet. So if we don't have Durham Smythe, I think we need to keep Shaheen because you can't. Gesicki is not going to give you anything in the blocking game, or not enough in the blocking game. He can. So I'd keep him. I think that's a smart way to spend that 1.4 million, 1.8 million. I think that's a smart way to spend it.
So let's just do a quick little overview. Where else now, with what we've done in free agency, the guys that you're cutting there, I'm assuming you're on the same page here. It's offensive line. That's still where you're looking with the rest of this cap space?
Yeah, offensive line. offensive line, and if you can get, I still think, I still feel like we need another receiver, especially because I don't trust Preston Williams. I don't to stay healthy. I don't trust Devontae to stay healthy for a full season, and that sucks because I really like Devontae Parker. But I think Waddle, as good as he is, and again the potential that Wilson has, I think it's wonderful. But it would not bother me if Miami were to go and get a top receiver that might be left. I don't know outside of Allen Robinson. I'm not 100% sure who's left because you got to take what's his face off of that Odell because he's not going to play for you next season. So for me, I would like to see another wide receiver, but I also am not giving them Christian Kirk money. It's not happening.
No, and the guys that are still out here, my guess aren't going to go for that kind of money. There are quite a few names. Juju Smith-Schuster, Jarvis Landry was cut by Cleveland, although it doesn't sound like he's going to be coming Miami's way. Traquan Smith, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You go to some vets in A.J. Green, T.Y. Hilton, or Emmanuel Sanders, Jamison Crowder. Sammy Watkins is still out there. So there are a lot of vets that are still out there that my guess are going to play on 1 to 2 year deals and probably not for Christian Kirk type money.
Yeah, not happening. No, at least from me, it would not be that kind of money.
So let's get into our Q&A here. If you want to ask us questions, make sure to be following us on Twitter so that you could send in questions before we go on the show. I'm at Higher Justin, Nick's at OSO6446, and we've got a couple of really good ones that allow us to dive a little bit more into some of our free agency thought process. So first one here is from at the Great Finsby. Excellent handle there.
Wonderful.
What do you grade this free agency process so far? I'd say B- because we've only signed one lineman. If we draft a center or look for Treader, a tackle, Collins or Moses, it's an A+ to me. That's all from the Great Finsby. Nick, how do you grade this free agency process so far?
A B. I'm not. I mean, because I agree. I think that there is no major splash in the offensive line, and that's where the money needs to be spent. Yeah, I think a B is fair. B-. I think the Ogba signing just really knocks up everyone else's grade, and I don't think they did anything. If you look at every single signing they made, I don't think there's anything that will be under that B average, or a B- at worst. So for me, it's a B.
B is about where I'm landing to, maybe closer to B-, really because if Ogba wasn't on this list and that was a re-sign technically before the legal term agreement would open, it would be much lower. So, and I have a little caveat to this answer. If this is how we're left, if we're done with free agency, that grade tanks to me.
Oh, big time. 100%.
C-. So if I'm saying this is our free agency grade and we're done and on to the draft, it is not a B. It is much,
100%.
much lower because if this is the state of the offensive line heading into the draft, we have big problems. Big problems. And again, I think I'm a little bit more positive outlook here on the Connor Williams signing than even others. And I'm still saying that if this is the state of our offensive line heading into the draft, big problems. So
yeah,
I'll say
I'm totally with you.
B with a very large asterisk. That is, the Dolphins need to land either one of the big guys like Teron Armstead, Lyle Collins, or if not one of them, then maybe several of the next tier. Morgan Moses did a great job with the Jets at right tackle. I already mentioned Trent Brown, which is a bit of a high-risk signing. Eric Fisher still out there. Bradley Bozeman, I'm shocked, is still on the market at center. Someone who played really well for the Ravens last year. The Dolphins, I think, should be looking at him as well. So B- with a very large asterisk that this tanks to a CC- if the Dolphins do not get one of the big. It almost seems like they've taken a bit of a risk here, Nick, because it seems like they've saved some of their money that they could have invested into other O-linemen who have signed, particularly on the interior. You look at Brian Allen, Austin Corbett, James Daniels, guys that I know a lot of fans are really excited about, to potentially get Teron Armstead, who they seem to have been gunning for, and for a lot of reports have been really interested in. Now it sounds like Armstead may be going back to the Saints if they land a certain quarterback in the trade market. So
a certain quarterback,
and it seems like a lot of free agents are waiting to see where Deshaun Watson ends up before they make their spot. I actually believe that there were a couple of reports that came out relatively recently that said that is the case. That Aaron Wilson of Pro Football Network is saying that players on the market are waiting to see where if Deshaun Watson is going to New Orleans to potentially land there. So, that could change a lot of things. And if Armstead goes back to New Orleans and the Dolphins are sort of left hanging, they better gun hard for La'el Collins or a couple of these other guys, or there's some problems on that line.
Yep, no, I agree. If they're done, it's a problem. But I feel like I'm seeing, like, if we're reading the tea leaves again, I feel like it's more likely for them to make a move for Collins than to sign one of those big tackles at this point. Personally,
well, and that would still be, I believe, a big win. Collins
win.
Collins was one of the better right tackles in the NFL when he's been on the field, and that's to his blind side. So if you get La'el Collins and you have Robert Hunt and you have Connor Williams and you make the rest of these guys, Liam Eichenberg, battle it out for that left tackle spot. Maybe they can patch up center as well. Although Michael Beater was not a huge problem for the team necessarily. Then that's a much better spot where the team was in before. So we're talking O-line. You might as well go to our next question that talks about the O-line. It's at Amandella O asks, why does Greer always bargain shop for offensive linemen? Most money and draft picks for 3 years. What gives? What gives? He asks you, Nick.
I mean, I think that's a fair question, if I'm being totally honest, because it hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked for a long time. I think it's time to move away from that because and I think there are certain positions where you can get away with bargains, but I think the trenches are not those positions. Both sides of the ball, I think they're not those. I think there's more failure stories than there are success stories. Obviously, every once in a while, somebody outplays the 1-year deal that they signed to, right? But it's more unlikely than it is not. I agree. I think it's a mistake for him to consistently only focus on bargain players for the trenches, because the trenches make or break your game. Period. It doesn't matter what side, they make or break it. That's where the majority of your money should be put in. Now, some people will argue other positions outside of quarterback, right? Other positions. But if you don't have a secure front line, doesn't matter who your quarterback is. You and I talked about that millions of times. So the fact that they haven't, I mean, they've invested draft picks, right?
Right.
It's just they've not panned out. And if you are not good at evaluating offensive line talent, at a certain point you need to acknowledge that and go get the guy who you know is already good. Right? You see that happen a lot of the time with other teams, right? And the Rams kind of popularize it. You know who's good, go get him. Right? If you know Terran Armstead is good, go get him.
Just like, I'm going to quote you here, the offensive line, the trenches are not where you should be bargain shopping. That's just, it's not, it's the last spot of your team, maybe other than quarterback, that you should be throwing things against the wall and hoping it sticks, because especially with the offensive line, it almost never works. And your whole offense runs through your offensive line. If you have a terrible offensive line, unless you have one of the future Hall of Famer superstar elite quarterbacks, the quarterback's not going to be able to cover up a really bad offensive line. And I completely agree with our question asker here. It's what gives? Hopefully we see over the next couple of days that trend is going to change, because the Dolphins desperately need some stability and some stellar play on that offensive line. And you often have to pay big bucks for stellar play on the offensive line in the NFL. JC Tretter's out there, Teron Armstead's out there, La'el Collins is out there, Bradley Bozeman's out there. Go get those guys. Get those guys and patch up that offensive line. And it seems like the fact that they're going after hard for Teron Armstead, the lesson is being learned, but you actually have to follow through and nab one of those guys if it's going to make a difference come game day on Sunday. So we will see over the next 24 to 48 hours if the Dolphins are able to land one of those guys. There's absolutely competition now. It's already been reported that New England's interested in La'el Collins. It's already obviously reported that Armstead may or may not be staying in New Orleans. So
we got to make a move. We talked about quarterback being up on that list, right? High on that list. I would argue that it's more probable for you to win a Super Bowl with a mediocre quarterback than it is with a mediocre offensive line.
Yeah. Yeah,
I would rather
completely
have
agree.
a mediocre quarterback and the best offensive line of football with the running back who's somewhat competent than the most elite quarterback in the game and the offensive line that we had last year. Because and you and I talked about this, no quarterback would have been able to survive that offensive line and lead this team to victories. It was just not possible.
The only exception to that rule that we've seen recently is Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, who helped lead a very poor offensive line to the Super Bowl. But even the Cincinnati offensive line had some strong players, and I believe Pro Football Focus had them as the 20th ranked offensive line. Not that one ranking is the be all end all, and they certainly had some big problems there because he was sacked so often and their interior was so poor. But you really don't see an exception to the offensive line rule very often. You have to have the very, 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 very best of the very, very best.
And it continued. Patrick Mahomes, best of the best, right? Gets wrecked in that Super Bowl because he didn't have an offensive line.
Right.
Joe Burrow
in that case because they were all hurt.
He doesn't have an
yes.
offensive line. Well, but still,
the rule still stands.
Exactly. You still have a poor offensive line. Your quarterback ain't going to do nothing. I don't care who it is.
While we've been recording, by the way, one more small free agent move from the Dolphins. Sam Iguavoin has been brought back.
Oh, cool.
To help reinforce that linebacker. It looks like the linebacker unit's going to be very much the same as it was last year.
Unless they go get Bobby Wagner.
Miles Jack, or potentially a lot of fans are excited about Devin Lloyd if he falls to 29.
And Jack's interesting too because there were many reports that we were interested in Miles Jack following the 2016 draft it was.
Yeah.
That was the year that he tore his something.
Yes. And the year they drafted Xavier Howard in the second round instead, when Jacksonville
which worked out pretty well.
Round, which did so. I'd say the Dolphins still came away from that one okay,
100%.
But a chance to maybe get both on the same defense. Now, let's go to our next question here from @FinFanny. Repeat question. We appreciate FinFanny you asking a question again here on the show. If we were to acquire, what would the likes of a Laviska Shenault look like in Mike McDaniel's offense? Deebo Samuel 2.0 or something different?
Wow, that would be an interesting play because he's exceptionally young.
And there have been reports that Jacksonville is potentially shopping him after giving a boatload of money to Christian Kirk and Zay Jones.
So I love Shenault's potential. I think that in an offense that was borderline anemic last year, except for when they played Miami, he was able to really show a lot of quality potential. If Miami could go out and get him, I think that would, at least for the moment, pause my concern about the wide receiver room, because I think that now you've got three players with incredible potential. And Waddle, name's escaping me, but it's on the list. I know it is. I'm just going to scroll up. Wilson and Shenault. If Miami could make a play, I think that he could be a dangerous weapon in this offense. I think it would be a great move to sacrifice a mid to late round pick, depending on what they want for him for Shenault. I'd be very comfortable with that. Like if they say give us a fourth rounder, I would do that.
And I think that with, like you've touched on here, like was also touched on the question, Mike McDaniel's creativity would make would absolutely accentuate Laviska Shenault's strengths. Deebo Samuel 2.0, I think, is unfair expectations for anyone. Agreed. But Shenault is very dangerous with the ball in his hands. Shenault is very athletic. Shenault does have a lot of potential, very high ceiling if used properly, which doesn't really seem like he's been used properly so far in Jacksonville. Both of them, I believe, second-round picks. There are some similarities here. I'm not saying, again, don't think the expectation of Deebo Samuel 2.0 is fair, but I would certainly be all for that move. And like you said, there does seem to be maybe a little bit more room to cement the foundation of this wide receiver room. So, like you said, mid-round pick, I'm all in for that as well. Send it away.
Yeah, no questions asked.
Some more free agency news. It's fun when we're doing shows when there's free agency news. The Ravens are adding offensive tackle Morgan Moses. That's another tackle off the board. One of the first tackles off the board, because it seems like the whole market, the tackle market in particular, not necessarily the offensive line market, because a lot of the interior guys have signed, but the tackle market's been waiting for Teron Armstead. Veteran Morgan Moses says, no, I'm going to go over to the Baltimore Ravens. He signs a 3-year, $15 million deal. That was reported by Mike Garafolo of NFL Network. Dolphins got to make some moves if they want to secure that tackle spot because the roster of available guys is going to be dwindling. I've got a special request question here for you, Nick. This one is not from Twitter, but from my little brother. Andrew asks, should the Dolphins permanently switch to their retro logo and uniforms?
No.
No. You might be in the minority here of Dolphins of Dolphins fandom that says no.
I think one of the reasons that it's so special is because we don't see it all the time. And I think if you take it out every single time, it's going to lose some of what makes it awesome. Now, do I think maybe it's time for a rebrand? Not necessarily opposed to that. But I think if you break out the retro every single week, it's going to lose the fun of it and the excitement of it. I don't believe so.
Interesting. Okay, that's fair. I don't think I agree. I think the retro uniforms are
absolutely
gorgeous and would love to see them every week. I really would. So I'm gonna go with why not. I guess you gave me a why not, but I'm gonna go with yes. I'm gonna say that the Dolphins.
I think the reason I like it
one of the
so
best
much
logos in the one of the best uniforms rather in the NFL.
Especially when it comes to the throwbacks. Have you seen the Packers? What the heck is that?
Yeah, but they don't have great throwback uniforms. The Dolphins do.
That's true, but I just think there's something awesome about being able to see that like 2 or 3 times a year, and you just get excited about it because they're wearing that logo and you like it so much. I think if you standardize it and make it all the time, I think it's going to lose some of the magic of it. Okay. And it's not saying I don't love it because I love that. I love it so much. I just worry it's like it's people aren't going to like it as much.
Okay, all right. So here's an interesting one for you here. There is a segment of Dolphins fandom, certainly on Twitter, certainly in some of the group chats that I'm in with friends from back home, that feels as though the fact that the Dolphins have not landed a top-tier offensive lineman so far, in general, this free agency is an absolute mess. One of those questions here is along those lines. At David_Johnson41 asks, why did this go so poorly? And then he goes on to say, can we get an autopsy on this free agency? How do you respond to that kind of sentiment here?
Well, I would ask what would you acknowledge? What are you saying went so poorly? You got a good pass rusher who fits your scheme well. You brought back your 3 linebackers that you need to play defense, right? You are potentially working the money that we have is not as free as you think it is, right? Gesicki's going to want a long-term deal. Xavier is getting restructured and potentially going to get more money. Wilkins is up for another deal next year, a second deal next year. If Tua pans out and he actually plays really well, you might want to get a little bit of a jump on re-signing him. I know there's a lot of ifs with that one, but the potential exists there. You can't just dump every single dollar into free agency. Now, I was also critical saying we haven't made a big splash yet. I thought we would. And the offensive line is specifically an area where I would have liked to have seen a splash taking place. But you and I both know that putting all of your money into one player doesn't always work out too, right? So I think in terms of like the autopsy side of things, I think Chris Grier is being cautious about dumping all of his eggs into one basket, right? Because then you're kind of stuck with a guy who might not be living up to that contract potential. Now, I don't believe he should be going bargain hunting all the time. I would have liked to see him make a play. But if we're trying to get into the mindset of Grier, I think that's where we can kind of play it out, saying he's not trying to set himself up for failure when he has to go sit down with Christian Wilkins. Is like, oh, I don't have any money for you. Sorry.
And I also would say that we're not done yet.
Yeah.
The new league year hasn't even started yet. There are several guys still out there, and like we both acknowledged, if the Dolphins do not get another high-profile offensive lineman or a lot more support in general on the line, it's a huge mistake, and a lot will have gone wrong.
But nothing. What has gone wrong so far? I mean,
neglecting the offensive line. I don't think it's so much an indictment of the deal so far versus neglecting of the offensive line.
Yeah, but you're not necessarily out on any of the major players. Armstead is still available, right. Which Scherf is the only one that really I would say is like a top guy that you didn't get, right? Brown is available, who he was pretty good.
Lyle Collins is still available.
Lyle Collins is very good, and he's not even a free agent. Norwell is somebody who's out there too, that potentially could be an option, who's pretty solid. It's not over yet. Just because we didn't make a big splash yet doesn't mean it's not one coming, or two, there isn't other moves that we're looking at. Because a big splash could be going to get you Collins, and they might just be waiting till the league year starts to announce it.
So wait and see. Patience is the underlying message here. We'll see.
Talk to me after the draft, then we got a problem.
Let's go to our last one here. Why is no one talking about free agent right tackle Tom Compton? He was great last year in McDaniel's offense. I mean, jump on this one here and just say yes.
No?
But so that was funny. Good in McDaniel's offense, but also backup. Backup, I believe, was a plug and play when there were injuries.
So I looked up his time because he's bounced around the league a lot. This Tom Compton fellow,
journeyman, that's what you'd call
as what you'd call him. He played for San Francisco for 2 years. 33% of the snaps his first year, slightly above half last year with 52%.
Yeah,
for me, I mean that's why no one's talking about it. Right there's your answer, because he started 7 games for them. Let me scroll up. 7 games.
Could be some good veteran journeyman depth,
decent backup
for this team.
That's why no one's talking about him. You asked why, because
there are other names.
Yeah, there are more important names to be discussing.
Alrighty, that does it for our Q&A section. Again, thank you very much to everyone who submitted questions here. I didn't even shout that last one out. That was at 8and8 for life on Twitter. Appreciate you. Appreciate everyone here who came on and asked questions. If you want your questions answered on the show, be sure to follow us on Twitter, again, at HigherJustin, at OSO6446, so that we can get you in for our Q&A segment, give you an answer, give you a shout out on the show. We always appreciate engaging with you guys. So that brings us to nearly the end of our show, but we still have everyone's favorite segment left. It is the wild card question of the day, where we ask non-football related, fun, sometimes thought-provoking, sometimes just wonky bonkers kind of questions, and we see where it goes. It is Nick's turn this week to bring in a question. I know we talked about it before the show. This is going to be an on-the-fly kind of thing. Nick, did you think of one on the fly? Those are your best ones usually. Your best ones.
I did. It's not much of a thinker, though. Usually I come up with a thinker on the fly. Okay. It's not much of a thinker, but I think we need to give a little respect to the 1 week in the year where everyone in America cares about college basketball. It's the only week that everyone does. After next week, it won't matter. It's literally just this week. Justin, who is your upset pick? Who is your favorite upset pick of the first round of the tourney starting on Thursday?
I'm gonna have to pull up my bracket here.
I'll give you a second.
So you give me yours while I pull up my bracket.
Yeah,
I did make a bracket. I know very little about college basketball.
So do I. I have no idea. I don't even know if it's that big of an upset, but the underdog team that I'm riding with until I will ride and die with it is Loyola. I will ride and die with Sister Jean until it gets absurd. Right then, I'm not going to ride or die. However, I am picking Duke to win the whole thing, because I am riding or dying with Coach K.
I also picked Duke to win the whole thing. Now that I'm looking, I should. The fact that I didn't know this one on the top of my head is I'm ashamed of myself as a Miami Hurricane that I did not say right off the bat Miami over USC is my upset pick of the first round. It's the first time in a while, certainly since I've been a Miami Hurricane, that the basketball team has been good enough to really gung-ho root for. And again, as someone who's far more into the football scene than the basketball scene, that hasn't been necessarily a huge letdown for me as a Hurricane. But I will say that now that I am on my way out, about to graduate, it's getting one last hurrah to root for one of my Hurricane teams before I graduate is certainly fun. So I'm going to go Hurricanes over USC for my first round upset. I probably have the Hurricanes going a bit further than I should in my bracket now that I'm looking at it again. But hey, that's what you got to do.
And I want to go on the record too. In saying that I don't believe I actually have Loyola winning the next round, but I haven't beaten Ohio State. Sister Jean. But yes, I also have Duke, and I was really torn about Miami USC. I don't think I went with the Hurricanes, but I was very torn on it.
That's hurtful. I'm very upset.
Yeah, you'll be all right.
I'm very upset about it. Thank you very much to everyone for joining the Aqua and Orange show this week. We can be found, like we mentioned, on Twitter at HigherJustin, at OS6446. We are also found on YouTube as well. If you want the video version of this podcast, we live stream all of our shows. So if you're following us on Twitter, you could see when we're going live. You can stream us on YouTube, stream us on Twitter when we go live. And of course, we're found everywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google, and the like. So make sure, please go give us a review if you like what you're hearing. Subscribe so you don't miss any of our future shows. We will be back potentially later this week, if not definitely next week, to break down all of free agency. Got to keep guys on your toes. To break down the rest of free agency. And we'll be getting many shows out over the next month or so to prep you for the draft. Everything you got to know Dolphins-wise up to the draft. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're following us so you can be up to date on that. But until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see y'all on the next show.
Thanks, everybody.